What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld, and thank you for joining me today. This is episode 12 of Hockey on the Spot, continuing with the 30 teams in 30 days for the entire month of August. And for today, we got a lot to talk about because today's team we are going to be talking about is none other than the Dallas Stars. And they've been arguably the most active team this offseason, so I'll try to make this as fast as I possibly can. So work with me. Here we go. The Dallas Stars. For the fifth straight year, they failed to make the playoffs. They haven't made the playoffs since going to the Western Conference Finals in 2008 and losing in six to the Detroit Red Wings. They haven't made the playoffs for 5 straight years. In the last 3 years, they would look like a team that was going to go to the playoffs in the beginning. They would lead the division in scoring for a while, particularly in the 2010-2011 season. They were leading the Pacific Division for a while, and then they just lost it in the last few weeks of the season and failed to make the playoffs. They were eliminated on the last day on a 5-3 loss to the Minnesota Wild. Anyway, but any kind of retool that they've been trying to do has not worked up until this point. However, this time, I think that they made the moves necessary to finally get them back in the right direction. First of all, a new GM was hired into Dallas. Jim Nill, former assistant general manager of the Detroit Red Wings, looks to take his experience from the Detroit Red Wings to the Dallas Stars, and this is a big move for the Dallas Stars. And he knew that a change was necessary in Dallas, and it all started with a new head coach. They hire head coach, former Buffalo Sabres head coach Lindy Ruff, in hopes that he could get this team back on the right track. Ruff was fired by the Buffalo Sabres after 15 long years. He was the longest tenured coach in the National Hockey League. Ruff also bringing along James Patrick, who was an assistant coach in Buffalo, will now be an assistant coach in Dallas. And Nill and Ruff together looked to retool this team and majorly build them up. They added a lot of players for a team that last year finished 11th in the Western Conference with 48 points, a 22-22-4 record, and pretty much even record, but they finished 7 points out of a playoff spot, and a team that finished 21st overall in the league, and a three-way tie for 48 points between them, the New Jersey Devils, and the Buffalo Sabres. They finished ahead of both of those two teams. But it still was not enough to put them in the playoffs. And after 5 straight years of misery, for a team that used to be considered one of the most elite organizations in the league, a major retooling was necessary. So we'll start with some of the departures that they made. Tom Wandell being youngster Tom Wandell. He is still an unrestricted free agent, but he will not be back in Dallas. They also let Eric Nystrom go, who had been very good for them, but Eric Nystrom, it was time for him to leave for this rebuild to fully happen. He signs with the Nashville Predators. And the other departures they've made have all left via trade, and we will talk about those as we go along. Some of the additions they made, we'll start with the more minor additions. They signed Chris Mueller over from the Nashville Predators. There's a good depth player. He'll probably be their 13th or 14th forward going forward. He's a solid player, but again, is more of a depth player. So Chris Mueller, solid signing by the Stars, and they also bring in veteran goaltender Dan Ellis coming over from the Carolina Hurricanes. They needed a new backup goaltender and one that could possibly take a little bit off of Kari Lehtonen, who is a guy who has had injury problems throughout his career. Dan Ellis filled in for Cam Ward last year when he got hurt. Didn't do all that great, no offense to him, but hopefully he can be solid enough in Dallas to take some pressure off of Kari Lehtonen, and hopefully that was just a bad season for him. So a good signing there. And now we'll get to some of the bigger additions, starting with the first addition they made overall, acquiring and then signing 39-year-old defenseman Sergei Gonchar from the Ottawa Senators. When Erik Karlsson went down, Gonchar basically took over that blue line with his leadership. They acquired him in a trade in exchange for a low draft pick, and then they signed him to a one-year deal. Up until this trade, they only had one pure power play quarterback with a big shot from the point, and that was Alex Goligoski. Every other defenseman on that roster does not shoot like that. They needed a guy who could shoot like that, and Sergei Gonchar can do just that. Not the same player that he was in Washington and Pittsburgh, but he still hopefully can be a solid enough addition and bring some leadership to get some of the youngsters going this year. I mean, we can assume that this could potentially be Gonchar's last year in the National Hockey League. That's going to be the thought, at the least. But anyway, and then the big things they did this offseason came in the form of trades. Literally a month after the Gonchar signing, they made two trades on pretty much the same day or 2 days apart. We'll start with the one that was a little more minor but still big. They acquired veteran center Shawn Horcoff from the Edmonton Oilers to add some center depth. He will most likely be seen on the third line, or I assume that he'll be playing on the third line, but he could play on the second line. We will see. But for Shawn Horcoff, it wasn't a great year for him last year in Edmonton. He only had 7 goals and 5 assists for a combined 12 points in 31 games, and another season that he spent on the shelf at times with injuries. And this is a player who's had injury problems his whole career. He spent his whole career in Edmonton up until this point. So when he's healthy and playing at his best, he's a very creative hockey player, solid playmaker, a former All-Star. And he just hasn't been the same since that injury in 2008. But he's still a solid player and a good leader, too. He was the captain for the Edmonton Oilers, so it's a good acquisition there. But they got him in exchange for defenseman Philip Larson, as well as a draft pick. So Philip Larson leaves Dallas. It's a good puck-moving defenseman and a good depth defenseman going the other way. And then the biggest move that the Dallas Stars made this summer came in the form of a trade with the Boston Bruins. That's right, folks. A trade that nobody saw coming. But in order to make the trade work, they had to say goodbye to longtime core player Louis Eriksson, who had been their leading goal scorer at times. They're going to miss his offense very much, and he was a very popular player in Dallas. But now Louis Eriksson gets traded to the Boston Bruins, as well as 3 of their top prospects, Riley Smith, who has NHL experience, Matt Frazier, who has NHL experience, 2 goal scorers right there, and then Joseph Morrow, who probably was their top prospect going after the trade deadline. He's going to be an excellent offensive defenseman in this league. But in exchange, the Dallas Stars get center Tyler Seguin, who was the former 2nd overall draft pick in the 2010 NHL entry draft. A guy who is a pure offensive player, playmaker, and sniper. After a great year in 2011-2012, where he led the Bruins in scoring and looked like he was going in the right direction and becoming the player they wanted him to be, he set back last season and started seeing minutes on the third line as a winger. That will not be the case in Dallas. He will be the top line center because they need center depth and because he has that potential. And he will play on the line with Jamie Benn and most likely I could possibly see a kid like Alex Chiasson maybe playing on that line at some point. Um, and in so a guy who did not live up to his expectations in Boston hopes to get a new start in Dallas. They also get Rich Peverley in that trade, another center, but a center who could also play wing. Um, what was probably the best defensive forward outside of Patrice Bergeron that the Bruins had. Guy who can kill penalties and a guy who can score a decent amount too. Playmaker, a guy who with great speed and who makes a good first pass. So a great addition for the Dallas Stars there. And they also get prospect defenseman Ryan Button, who is a shutdown defenseman. So a good trade, I think. It's going to be hard to say who's going to get the better of that trade for the immediate, but it's a trade that Dallas felt they need to make. So I think it's a good deal. And then, even then, it didn't even stop there. They also made some noise at the 2013 NHL entry draft when they took one of the top players in that draft. They had the 10th overall pick, and with the 10th overall pick, they took Russian right winger Valeri Nichushkin, big 6'4", 202-pound forward, the highest rated Russian in last year's draft, and for good reason. He has great hands, and another guy who could compete for that top line spot, and a guy who could be ready to play in the NHL this year. He'll definitely get a shot at a tryout. So now with all these trades made, looking at their forward core, they are now extremely deep on the wing, particularly the left wing. The left wing is probably where they are at their strongest with Jamie Benn and Ray Whitney. Ray Whitney has another year on his contract. Eric Cole and Ryan Garbutt. The right wing is okay, I think. Rich Peverley. The right wing is probably where they have the most problems. Rich Peverley, Valeri Nichushkin, Alex Chiasson, and Antoine Roussel. I think that's where they could struggle. And then at center, Tyler Seguin, Sean Horkoff, Cody Eakin, and Vernon Fiddler. And then there's the extra forwards. So we talked about Chris Mueller, but also Lane McDermott also in there. He was great when he came over last year, so he'll look to be a mainstay. And then you got the defense. I think it's a pretty good-looking defense, actually. They got Alex Goligoski and Brendan Dillon up there. They got Brendan Dillon has proved last year that he could be a promising defenseman in this league. Sergei Gonchar and Stefan Robida, they'll play together. Trevor Daley, he also there. And then they have a 6th spot open. Last year, Aaron Rome was the guy playing in that spot, but this year I think he'll be more of the 7th defenseman, as it now comes time for maybe a guy like Jamie Oleksiak to step in and have a significant role. Big, hulking 6'7" blue liner. He'll be the biggest player on that team. He played 16 games at the end of last season, and he's going to add some depth on defense. He's going to be a good player, a shutdown defenseman, and a guy that no one's going to like to play against. So I have a feeling next year he's going to get a shot to play, and Aaron Rome will be the 7th defenseman. And then, of course, in goal, Kari Lehtinen and Dan Ellis. So it's a pretty good lineup, I think. But in certain areas, it may need a little more work. But they'll work it out. But now we get to these questions. Can the Dallas Stars be a better scoring team than they were last year? Last year, they did not score very much, and they let up a lot of shots on goal. So that was a big problem they had, and it got worse when they traded Michael Ryder out of Dallas into Montreal to get Eric Cole. So that's something that's going to need to change. And can Kari Lehtinen stay healthy? Probably the biggest question of all. Hopefully he can, and hopefully Dan Ellis can give him some relief. And then another really important one, can Tyler Seguin live up to what he was expected to be from the 2010 NHL entry draft? I think he's going to have some good chemistry with Jamie Benn. So honestly, I'm going to say yes. I think he's going to have great chemistry with Jamie Benn, who could quite potentially become the next captain for this team. So we'll see what happens. I think I like their team. I think their team is going to be pretty good this year, or at least better than it was the past few years. They're going to go in the right direction for sure. Now we will take a look at some of the top prospects on this team. They have a pretty significant prospect pool. It's pretty deep, actually. The big thing about these prospects is their size. They have a lot of guys that are 6'3" or bigger, and which makes for a pretty deep prospect pool. I'd say it's actually within the Central Division, definitely along the lines of the Colorado Avalanche. I'd probably say maybe not as deep as the Colorado Avalanche, but close. But nowhere near as deep as the Chicago Blackhawks. So, there you go right there. Speaking of that, just said Central Division. That's right, folks. One thing I did forget to mention, the Dallas Stars being moved out of the Pacific Division with the Flames, Oilers, and Canucks moving in to join the Ducks, Kings, Coyotes, and Sharks. The Dallas Stars, the odd team out, they move into the Central with the likes of Chicago Blackhawks, Nashville Predators, and St. Louis Blues. The Colorado Avalanche joining into Minnesota Wild as well. And finally, the Winnipeg Jets coming over from the Eastern Conference to join that division. So the division that sees the most new faces. And also something else that changed about the Dallas Stars this season, they got new uniforms, and much better uniforms too. I like these new uniforms a lot better than their old ones, and it shows that a change is coming. So anyway, going back to the prospects, it was definitely a hard choice for the guy who highlights, but in the end, for me, with this team, I'd probably have to go with their #1 ranked prospect, right winger Valeri Nichushkin. I've seen this kid play. I mentioned 6'4", 202 pounds, the 10th overall pick last year. He scored the bronze medal winning goal against Team Canada in overtime. Watching this kid play, I was just absolutely impressed. He is your prototypical Russian power forward, and a big guy, strong guy, uses his size, and he's got great hands. Pretty much a Rick Nash type player, or the Russian version of Rick Nash. He's pretty much just as big as Nash, and he's going to be one heck of a player. He'll be tough to play against for sure. So, and he definitely will compete to play in the NHL this year. So Valeri Nichushkin is my top prospect for the Stars, or the guy who I will highlight. And now, the player on the Dallas Stars, in my opinion, that needs to play well in order for this team to turn around has got to be their top line center for this coming season, Tyler Seguin. I mentioned it before. Seguin, not a good season in Boston last year. He comes over to Dallas looking for a new start. And if Jamie Benn's going to break out and have a career year, and if whoever is going to play right wing on that line breaks out, is going to have a career year as well, Seguin needs to be that player that the Bruins thought he was going to be when they picked him 2nd overall. He has to have a turnaround year. I mean, he has to go back to playing like he did in 2011, 2012, and better. So if that Stars are going to be a playoff team, he needs to be better. Overall, are the Dallas Stars a playoff team? It's hard to say right now. I like the direction they're going in. I think they're right on that level with the Phoenix Coyotes. So it could be either yes or no. I guess I'm kind of going to say no. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, honestly. I'm going to say no. I think they need to do a little bit more in order to be a playoff team. I don't think Sean Horkoff at this stage in his career is a worthy second-line center. I think they need a better second-line center than that, and that'll come over time. So, to me, the Dallas Stars, not a playoff team, but they're going to be very close. They're going to be one of the better non-playoff teams. They'll have an over 500 record, and they'll be probably in that 9th spot. And they could slip into 8th. I think they could slip into a playoff spot and surprise everyone. So, but overall, looking at it now, I'm going to say no. They need a little more work. All right, guys, that'll do it for today's episode of Hockey on the Spot. For our next episode, join me for our next episode. Where we talk about the Minnesota Wild. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld, and tune in next time. Thank you, and have a great day.